You could argue that no one had a bigger impact on the 20th century than Albert Einstein. He rewrote the laws of physics, unlocked the atom, and became the universal symbol of genius. And yet he was a notoriously poor student. He struggled to focus on subjects that didn't interest him, often retreating into a world of daydreams and deep, obsessive thought about the things that did. For anyone with ADHD, that might sound familiar. So with that in mind, let's look at Albert Einstein through the lens of the 5 diagnostic traits of ADHD: inattention, hyperfocus, impulsivity, emotional dysregulation, and rejection-sensitive dysphoria. Everyone zones out sometimes, but ADHD isn't about occasional distraction. It's about persistent inattention, so frequent and intense, it starts to shape your life. And just to be clear, people with ADHD don't lack attention. They just can't control where it goes. Albert Einstein couldn't fake interest. If something didn't spark him, especially rote memorization or dry schoolwork, he simply could not engage. By his own admission, he was lazy towards subjects that didn't excite him, a pattern that followed him throughout his education. At the rigid Leupold Gymnasium in Munich, while attending the Polytechnic in Zurich, the pattern continued. He skipped classes and borrowed notes from his friends that had attended them instead of taking his own. One professor in particular, Heinrich Weber, was so unimpressed that he refused to write Einstein a letter of recommendation, saying, "You are a very clever boy, Einstein, but you have one great fault. You never let yourself be told anything." On its face, that sounds like arrogance. But it's not. As the saying goes, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Not because it doesn't care, but because it can't care on command. When Einstein did care about something, he couldn't care about anything else. Personal hygiene, laundry, matching socks, appointments, all of it vanished in the shadow of his curiosity. Once, while traveling from Vienna to Munich, Einstein became so absorbed in thought that he didn't notice the train had reached his stop. Everyone else got off. The platform emptied, but Einstein just sat there, in a daze, eyes distant, mind somewhere far beyond the tracks. It wasn't until the train lurched forward again, pulling away from the Munich station, that he snapped out of it. Missing a train stop is one thing, but Einstein's hyperfocus didn't just make him late, it made him disappear. While living alone, he'd sometimes go an entire day without eating, because time vanished. When he was immersed in a problem, basic needs, eating, sleeping, dressing, became irrelevant. His body waited, his thoughts didn't. Even later in life, assistants had to remind him to stop and eat. His obsession with the mysteries of the universe came at a cost. Those closest to him often found themselves ignored, eclipsed by thought. Like Sherlock Holmes, Einstein would retreat into his violin, playing for hours to unlock an idea or perhaps to escape a feeling. To his first wife, Mileva Maric, this wasn't charming. She came to resent the instrument that received more attention than she or their children ever did. Einstein himself once described his problem-solving approach. "I stay with the problem longer." And indeed he did, but maybe he wouldn't have had to stay quite so long if he hadn't been quite so impulsive in the first place. There's a thrill in the chase, especially for people with ADHD, chasing an idea, a possibility, chasing to get that hit of dopamine that makes the world light up. Sometimes the chase is intellectual, and sometimes it's survival. The rise of Nazi ideology terrified Albert Einstein. As a Jewish intellectual and one of Germany's most outspoken critics, he knew he was a target. So he left. Abruptly, he walked away from his homeland, his academic post, his social circle, everything. No long goodbye, no detailed plan, just instinct. In fact, he left in such a hurry, the Nazis confiscated his property and seized his bank accounts. They put him on a wanted list. They used his face on anti-Semitic posters accusing him of corrupting German science. And while no one would blame him for fleeing, Einstein never forgot the way it happened. The trauma of that sudden break haunted him for the rest of his life. And while he left Germany, he remained, for better or worse, the same outspoken Albert Einstein. While teaching at Princeton, he fell into the same behavioral patterns that had marked his youth. He was known to send sharply worded or dismissive letters, even to respected colleagues. He was labeled a radical because he often wrote widely printed open letters condemning nationalism, racism, and war. This made him a target of the FBI during the McCarthy era. Writing letters, it turns out, was actually a key to how Albert Einstein handled his emotions. Emotional dysregulation often stems from an overactive amygdala, the part of the brain that governs our fight or flight response. But it can also come from a lack of awareness of one's own emotions, or a total misunderstanding of how emotions work in others. In Einstein's case, probably all of the above. One infamous example is his 1914 letter to his first wife, Mileva Maric. By that time, their marriage had deteriorated after 11 years. Whether it was emotional blindness, passive aggression, or a warped attempt at control, the letter reads more like a contract with a servant than a note to a spouse. Here are a few things written in the letter. You will not expect any intimacy from me. You will stop talking to me if I request it. You will not expect affection. And you will serve me 3 meals a day in my room. Keep in mind, this was a man who could reimagine time and space, but couldn't navigate basic emotional intimacy. Why didn't he just ask for a divorce? We can't say for sure, but a few possibilities emerge. Emotional cowardice. Walking away may have felt harder than manipulating her into leaving. Control. The contract could have shifted the emotional burden onto her. Avoidance. He may have framed emotion as a problem to manage, not confront. And conflict avoidance, something that is often found in people with ADHD. Instead of facing discomfort, some people with ADHD try to engineer outcomes from a distance, even painfully so. Whatever the motive, the fallout was brutal. She left. After the marriage ended, his relationship with his sons, Edward and Hans Albert, also suffered. Edward, who later developed schizophrenia, spent most of his life in an institution Einstein rarely visited, and understandably, Edward felt abandoned by the father the world revered. Hans Albert, though closer to his father, would also later admit that Einstein struggled to emotionally show up for his children. That emotional inconsistency, love in theory, silence in practice, is common in people with emotional dysregulation. They may feel guilt, but can't access or sustain vulnerability. And then there was the letter, the one Einstein later deeply regretted writing, his 1939 letter to President Roosevelt, urging the U.S. to develop an atomic bomb before the Nazis did. It worked. It kick-started the Manhattan Project, but it haunted him. After the war, Einstein became a vocal pacifist, fighting for nuclear disarmament and global peace that ultimately put him in the crosshairs of J. Edgar Hoover, who saw Einstein's discontent as ingratitude toward the very system that had saved him from certain death. To some, that shift looked naive or inconsistent, but for someone with an intense inner life, perhaps it was the weight of unintended and very real external consequences became unbearable. Some of Einstein's most defiant traits, his rebellious streak, his bluntness, his refusal to play by the rules, may not have just come from principle. They may have also come from pain. Rejection-sensitive dysphoria is a trait common among people with ADHD. It can cause rejection, even perceived rejection, to seem catastrophic, life-ending. It can cause someone to lash out, shut down, or preemptively sabotage relationships to avoid being hurt. We often think of Einstein as cool-headed and rational, but in reality, he carried emotional scars, many from rejection early in life. He failed the entrance exam to ETH Zurich, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. On his first try, he clashed with professors like Heinrich Weber, who refused to write him a letter of recommendation, an act Einstein never forgave. Later, when that rejection cost him an academic job, He took a position at a Swiss patent office despite being wildly overqualified. And despite all his future fame, that early dismissal haunted him. One would hope, after achieving the level of notoriety he had, that he would perhaps become magnanimous or even supremely kind. Unfortunately, stories persist that he would often dismiss colleagues and students with such abruptness they often thought they had offended him. But it was probably deeper than taking offense. Think of Good Will Hunting, the genius janitor Will, who pushes people away before they can reject him. In fact, rejection is his armor, and Einstein was no different. He spoke out on issues that mattered to him. He stood against racism, fascism, and greed. But perhaps this wasn't only about justice. Maybe it was also about building a world where someone like him wouldn't be seen as a threat, a burden, or a failure. Where a brilliant, eccentric boy wouldn't be told that he was lazy, defiant, or impossible to teach. A world where he didn't have to choose between being accepted and being himself. ADHD, rejection, and intense curiosity shaped Albert Einstein. And Albert Einstein shaped the world. Einstein followed his distractions to his passions. To paraphrase the great Joseph Campbell, Einstein followed his bliss. For those with ADHD, just remember, whenever you fail to measure up to the standards others have placed upon you, one of the most brilliant minds of all time suffered the same kind of disappointed looks from teachers and parents. The same sense of rejection from institutions he, and perhaps you, was too good for. Einstein himself put it best. If you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will go through life believing it is a failure. No matter what anyone says, you are not a failure. And if you're struggling, perhaps you simply haven't yet found your bliss. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please hit that subscribe and like button, leave the comment down below, and until next time, stay focused.